Yog-Sothoth. Yog-Sothoth. This is the Abraxas Brief. And yes, we won't be talking about Yog-Sothoth, a villain from the Lovecraft mythos, but we will be talking about Yaldabaoth tonight. And yes, very Lovecraftian villain. In fact, we will be talking about the prime villain of the Gnostics, Yaldabaoth, the Demiurge, and his importance. I mean, after all, I think the Demiurge is probably the coolest villain in all religion and literature and all that. I mean, we are talking about when the villain is the supreme being. We're talking about when the villain is the God you grew up, the God of justice, the God of order, the God you were meant to trust. And again, what better villain than fighting the supreme being? How do you top that? And that's probably why the Demiurge makes such a compelling antagonist, even in this day, video games, movies, and so forth. And we'll get to that. I see people are joining. Welcome to the Abraxas Brief. Glad to see you tonight. Yes, I've got my Abraxas shirt. Does it make me look fat or full of gnosis? Let me know. So, the Demiurge. And in fact, I wanted to mention Yog-Sothoth. 23 species of parrots. Nipples for men, had to say that. So I wanted to mention that today, as I do this Abraxas Brief, today Stan Lee has passed away, one of the great figures and contributors to modern pop culture and to an extent modern occultism. Fare thee well, Stan Lee, and safe journeys to the farthest shore. But again, like Doctor Who said, our souls aren't made of atoms, they're made of stories. And your story and the stories you've shared with the world really makes you immortal and really means that you haven't left. It reminds me of the Simpsons episode a long time ago when Stan Lee appears at the comic guy's shop and he stays there, and then Bart comes back and sees Stan Lee still at the shop, and he's like, you came back, Stan Lee? And the comic book guy is, Stan Lee never left. No, Stan Lee has not left. And neither will we with our stories that we create, that we share with the world. So, any relation to Stan Lee and the Demiurge? Indeed, there is. There is a big connection, and to Gnosticism itself. Let's backtrack to around 1965, 1966. The Fantastic Four had just come out in comic books, and they were looking for plots around issue 40 or so, something like that. And Stan Lee told Jack Kirby, his partner, who should get much more mention, he told him, why don't we have the Fantastic Four fight God? They wanted the ultimate villain. Jack Kirby's response was, I kept going to the Bible and I kept coming back with Galactus. So needless to say, Galactus is probably perhaps the best modern representation of the Demiurge. We're talking this, again, supreme being, much more powerful than any mortal force, whose purpose is simply to drain the worlds of energy, to drain of their light spark. So Galactus is definitely a great cipher for Yaldabaoth, as the Demiurge is known. And needless to say, the Silver Surfer is, you got it, a fallen angel. The Silver Surfer is definitely a Luciferian character or a Sophianic character, a fallen part of the Demiurge, or actually pre-existing in some ways to the Demiurge, since he was transformed, who ends up fighting on the side of humanity. And you can certainly find a lot of Gnosticism, well, with Jack Kirby and his great series Devil Dinosaur. But you just have to look at the X-Men, and this is coming from Jeff Kripal's great book, Mutants and Mystics, where he makes the case. I think he talks about it too in the Serpent's Gift, where the X-Men are definitely a cipher for the Gnostics in history. These gifted people who have secrets of the cosmos and powers, who must remain hidden from the Hylics of the world. So that's all I'll say about Stan Lee on this day that he has passed, and again, his connection to the Demiurge. And yes, Vance, I see that. Yeah, no more cameos. Again, he'll be with us, and we'll see how Marvel does it. Obviously, I think the movies are they lack. I'm not going to give my opinion on the Marvel movies right now. This is not the show for that. Perhaps another show. So anyway, tonight we will be discussing the Demiurge. Here, let me take a drink of water. Yes, I grabbed my daughter's glass here. Very Abraxas, very manly. Her Princess Cup. I got a bit of a flu today, which of course, again, very Gnostic, because such is the body. I mean, when we are born, and at all times we are continuously being eaten by millions of critters and microbes and bacteria, and the virus really has no purpose in this universe. It's not even a life form, as some have said. So we are eaten, and that's the universe the Demiurge created. For those of you who still believe in the circle of life, we are born to be eaten, and we are being eaten at every moment, just like the Demiurge is always attempting to eat from the life force of the universe, like Galactus himself. Oh, and nipples for men. Do I even have to mention that? Excuse me. And no flies today. No Beelzebub with us. So anyway, let me start farting around here. Who is the Demiurge? Well, we must get to, as usual, we're going to have to run into Plato, because so many ideas seem to come from Plato. But Plato came up with the first concept of the Demiurge in his Timaeus. And in one of the dialogues, according to Plato, you've got the ultimate mind, or the one. And the ultimate mind is, again, the ground of all being. It is being. And what is becoming? Becoming is the Demiurge. So in a way, Plato saw the Demiurge as the Logos, as one of the early representations of the Logos. And the purpose of the Demiurge, this becoming, was to organize all the junk and stuff outside of the world of ideas, the chaos, the leftover materials, perhaps the scraps. And the Demiurge decides he is going to craft the world, and also imitated. He's going to craft the world based on the world of ideas, the perfect world. So, of course, we have the perfect chair. The Demiurge creates the perfect chair, or the perfect tree, or whatever. So the Demiurge ends up creating the world, the material universe, and this universe is good. I don't know, some scholars have said that Plato's depiction of the Demiurge wasn't exactly positive, more like necessary. I mean, why did you have to create this copy? Anyway, if there's already a perfect world, just leave that shit alone. But the Demiurge would become a very positive figure. Really, probably the supreme being, in a way, sort of Abraxas is the closest that any sort of divinity could be known. Again, world of ideas, the one being, Demiurge becoming. And he would be very holy in the Greco-Roman times, obviously with the Neoplatonists, Middle Platonists, and really so many groups in ancient times. Even in Christianity, it was the church father Justin Martyr in the 2nd century who referred to Jesus as, quote, the Demiurge of Yahweh. In other words, Jesus, again, the Logos, Jesus was the ultimate force of becoming on this earth. So the Demiurge was indeed a very positive and lauded and holy figure in ancient times. And then, then enter the Gnostics. As always, they had to come in and turn things upside down. Before I get to that, it should be mentioned that there's always been a mistake with the Demiurge. People have assumed, and I assumed it for a long time, that Demiurge meant half maker or something like that. But it was Andrew Philip Smith who pointed out that demi for half is actually Latin. In Greek, demi is public. So the Demiurge actually means public worker or craftsman. He's not the half maker, which the Gnostic Yaldabaoth would become. So anyway, the Gnostics came, and of course they turned everything upside down. And imagine they they decided that the Demiurge was not this holy figure, but a very negative figure. And again, people talk, well, the Gnostics weren't that rebellious. There was just another. No, think of the most holy thing today. Think of being in the middle of Saudi Arabia and saying that Allah is bad. That's basically what it came out to, because again, all these groups, Christians, pagans, and so forth, even Jews and their ideas of the Logos, thought this was the ultimate existence that we could know. And the Gnostics said, well, this ultimate existence is deficient, and he's basically insane, and he's basically evil. Why did they think that? Well, again, we go to our past shows about how they saw the world, but they saw this world was, again, a fallen world, a prison, and basically a fabricated, faked reality where we were trapped far away from the ultimate God. And not only did the Demiurge of the pagans become a bad hombre, they also associated with the Demiurge with, you got it, the God of the Old Testament, Jehovah himself. So the Gnostics were definitely insulting everybody. They were equal opportunity offenders, if you would. And they saw, of course, reading the Old Testament and how this God was depicted, again, in a lot of their Gospels. They said, well, it's simply Moses heard it wrong, and the Demiurge sort of fooled everybody and put his personality on there. The Old Testament was holy text, but it was completely corruptive to give Yaldabaoth a sort of a top billing. And the culmination was, of course, of who Yaldabaoth was the idea of, in Isaiah 45, where he goes, there is no God but me. I am a jealous God. And in many of the texts, they even say, why would he say there is no other God when there are other gods? Why would he be jealous? What kind of deficient God is this? He's the creator of our universe. But I'm sort of getting ahead of myself. Why would he say that? Well, according to the Gnostics, specifically the Sethians, you have the fall of Sophia. For whatever reason, Sophia transgresses against the eternal realm, the pleroma, if you would, and she is more or less cast out. In some depictions, actually, she is the negative part of her is cast out, and she becomes Achamoth, sort of the wisdom of death, the evil wisdom. But in some, its wisdom is more or less cast out from the eternal realm into the chaos, out of the world of ideas, sort of. And she becomes pregnant with her own negative emotions, her own fears, her own desires. It's a strange sort of purgation of this catharsis. But this catharsis turns into a pregnancy. And she doesn't give really birth to a child, but she has an abortion. In fact, it's very specific. The word in works like the Secret Book of Juan is an abortion, and this abortion becomes alive, and this abortion is is a tragic figure, because what happens, like in the Secret Book of John. Whoa. That was my phone there. It wasn't anybody from Marvel or anybody saying cease and desist. But anyway, it's a tragic figure as I see it, because when it's born, the abortion takes the energy of Sophia to survive. It's sort of the powers of the pleroma, and he becomes basically supreme. At the same time, in a very motherly way, Sophia covers this being in a silver cloud so the eternal realm can't see him, and sort of brings him down. She wants to protect him. But all of a sudden, this being becomes more or less conscious and realizes that it has got all this power. And in a way, in the chaos, it is supreme. Sophia is still for all practical purposes an aeon, so she's simply information. That's all she really is. And she's lost her power. But this being in the chaos knows that there is more than information. There is something called power. There is force. There is energy. And he takes it. And all of a sudden, in the Gnostic text, he says something like, again, he quotes Isaiah, or he's speaking as Jehovah. He says, "There is no God but me." And in some of the text, Sophia looks up and says, "You are wrong, Samael," which means blind God. That's one of the names of the Demiurge. But he doesn't listen. He's got all this power. He thinks he's got it going, and suddenly he decides to create, like the Demiurge of Plato, the material universe. So he creates the universe. He fashions it. He starts creating these archons, his servants. Well, here we are in this mess. And the story then becomes our fight against God. Like Jeff Kripal said in Mutant and Mystics, there is nothing more Gnostic than fighting God. And that's what happens because at some point, Yaldabaoth, and nobody really knows what that means. There's been a lot of theory. Some say it means child of chaos. I think April DeConnick thinks it means warlike Sabaoth, or going to war Sabaoth. So we really don't know. But Yaldabaoth was also called Samael, which means the blind god. Or Samael means, yes, blind god. And Sakla is also called the childish god, because again, he is the child of Sophia. He's very arrogant and very powerful. So he creates, at one point, again, like the Demiurge in the Timaeus, at one point he really does see the eternal realm. Either he sees Sophia walking to and fro, or the eternal realm shows him the true logos, the true Adam Cadman. And I guess it's in a way maybe to show Yaldabaoth the error of his ways, but he doesn't change. He decides he sees this eternal realm for the first time, and he's going to make a copy, like the one in the Timaeus, like the Demiurge in the Timaeus. And this copy, unlike Plato, the Gnostics contended, was a really crappy copy. But it was, again, it was just a terrible copy, but it was also a prison for the light of Sophia that had fallen, because Yaldabaoth did not want Sophia or any of the Aeons to rescue this energy, because he would be nothing without him. So the abortion and his archons are creating this world, entrapping the light and so forth. Then comes the saga of Adam, who he wanted to create as this figure, the Adam Cadman, up in the eternal realm. And Yaldabaoth and his archons realize it's pure perfection, especially when Sophia breathes a little light to sort of trick him into, well, it's part of her rescue operation. She breathes light. Yaldabaoth then breathes even more light into it and loses some of his powers. But then he realizes this Adam is really perfect because he has really a lot of the essence of Sophia in it. So he decides he's gonna separate, take out the light, which is Eve, and he's going to throw them in the Garden of Eden and all that saga. And here we continue with the Old Testament. Here we are today, still fighting Galactus, and men still have nipples. So this is the world we live in. And of course, Paul called this God the God of this world. And he certainly saw him as a negative. Later on, of course, Yaldabaoth would evolve and become Satan, as the Greco-Roman ideas of the Demiurge and so forth perished with the rise of Christianity and Islam. Yaldabaoth then changed to Satan, to the Bogomils and the Cathars, and he was again this force that had created the universe. And to the Cathars, he was also the brother of Jesus. So it was, again, you've got Ahriman and Ahura Mazda. You had Jesus and Satan fighting for this world. But like in a lot of the Zoroastrian myths, Ahriman controls this world. In fact, I always liked in the Gospel of Mark, I mean, when Satan takes Jesus over to tempt him or test him or whatever you want to call him, he does say, "Look at all the kingdoms of the world. These are mine." The author of Mark, again, seems to say that Satan, or this demiurgic figure, is in control. And of course, Paul, talking about the God of this world, these angels and powers and principalities that are controlling the world, were negative. So very Gnostic with this idea of the demiurge. But not all saw the Demiurge as bad. Again, we have to be specific. The Valentinians saw him, again, more into the way Justin Martyr and others. He was a necessary being that was created, and he was sort of holding things down. And when everything went back to the source, back to depth and silence, then the Demiurge would actually facilitate the world once again returning to its source, returning to the pleroma after the transgressions of Sophia. And it's interesting because in a lot of the Valentinian myths, Jesus is actually the daughter of Sophia and the brother of Satan again. So I think in Mormonism, I think Jesus and Satan are brothers too, whatever planets they're controlling. So in the Valentinians is more positive, but that's what I want to mention. And it's interesting because in the Bible always talks about how demons can notice Jesus. In the Valentinian myth, Satan actually can see the eternal realm. He actually can see the spirits and the angels. But the Demiurge, he can't. He's just sort of lumbering around, being a complete buffoon or not very bright guy or bright being, but he's still the supreme being. So what are you going to do with that? And that's the whole idea in Gnosticism, is that the Demiurge and his archons, they're basically, they're basically union thugs, bureaucrats with a nasty temper and a penchant for raping whatever they don't like. And I'm getting strange images about this. I need to take a drab because, again, this is not a good situation we are as humans if it's true, and I contend there's a lot of it that is true. Oh, before we get into his depiction, what I find interesting is that perhaps the greatest authority on the Valentinians, Einar Tomlinson, basically said that there are no archons. All the archons are simply aspects of Yaldabaoth, aspects of the Demiurge. Just like all the Aeons are really aspects of the divine mind. Same thing. There's really only two forces in this universe. And according to the Valentinians, one isn't really that more positive, and that one isn't that negative. Yes, there are bad thoughts and good thoughts, but they're all part of one divine mind, sort of trying to figure itself out. So, again, it's interesting because it just, as the Hermetic said, we are housed in the universe is housed in us. We are the mind of God trying to understand itself. So the question is, where is this mind and where is this head? But I guess that's where we're figuring out what gnosis. So how was the Demiurge depicted in the Gnostic narratives? Well, I'm sure many of you know, the Demiurge is depicted in the secret book of John having the head of a lion and the body of a serpent or a dragon. And why is that? Well, it's interesting if you read April de Conix, the 13th apostle, and I should have mentioned this in about 2 shows when I was talking about the Egyptian origins of Gnosticism. There is one very powerful and dangerous god in Egyptian lore that has the head of a lion and the body of a serpent, and that's the god Sharnubas or Sharnubas. In fact, when many of you see that black and white depiction of the Demiurge with the head of the lion and the lines out and that body, which looks more like a slug or something, that's actually Sharnubas. It's not really Yaldabaoth. But the Gnostics took that imagery or somehow took that theology. And who is Sharnubas? Well, as April explains, to the ancient Egyptians, there was a group of stars that was above the zodiacs. They were called the decans or decans or something like that. Nipples for men. And this was a group of 336 stars that came out every 10 days. And that's how the Egyptians learned to tell time too, and the hours with these decans. So these 36 and these decans were considered very powerful gods, much more powerful than the zodiac. Well, you've got Sharnubas was the 13th decan. And in many of the Gnostic Gospels, Yaldabaoth actually rules over the 13th heaven, the most powerful heaven. So you see the association there. And again, the Egyptians saw Shenubis as kind of a scary dude, just like the Gnostics then took him and made him a very scary dude too. So that is definitely where they got the idea of Yaldabaoth and how he's depicted. Of course, there is some symbolism to it. Let's change this real quick. Looking at some stuff. Oh, and of course, it should mention too, we can say that Shenubis, or actually Yaldabaoth, is probably based on, like the little smileys here. I hope you guys are enjoying this. Yaldabaoth, it might be based on the Mithraic god Aeon, who also has a lion head, and he has a human body, usually wrapped by a serpent. So, and I think some of scholars have said that in Mithraism, the lion is a symbol for time or limitations. Needless to say, Yaldabaoth, just as Yahweh in the Old Testament, have been correlated or connected with Saturn. We're talking a god of limits, a god who makes limited things, a god of justice, and a god of boundaries. So you've got Saturn, Aeon, and Yaldabaoth, and you've got Kronos, and you've got time. You see these associations. But why the head of the lion beyond that? Well, it should be noted that in ancient times, whenever you were depicting a spiritual being, you would give them animal features to describe them. In fact, we think of angels today with these, androgynous or cool-looking guys with wings, or women with wings, or whatever you want to call them. But in ancient times, the angels were depicted as the chimeras of advanced Dungeons and Dragons. There were animals with different features and whatever. So all these features symbolize something. And the lion in many myths, and this is across Europe and Asia and so forth, the lion was seen as a guardian of the underworld or astral roads. Why? Well, we think perhaps because lions can see in the night. They live in remote areas, and they were basically, in many myths, again, they were the gatekeepers of the stars. And that, of course, makes the Demiurge, who rules the stars for all practical purposes or impractical purposes. In fact, in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, a lion guardian does tell, again, somebody who's trying to cross the stars, just like in Gnosticism, because these two religions, Egyptian and Gnosticism, are so connected. But in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, a lion guardian tells this soul trying to travel, tells them, "How can you reach the confines of the sky? Indeed, you are equipped with the form of Horus, but you do not possess the Nemes headdress." The Nemes headdress is the lion headdress, because again, this gives you power, and this gives you the ability to cross the stars. And there are many examples of lion guardians, again, guarding or placed in pyramids or temples or tombs. As some have written, the lions, they rule the plains with speed and intelligence, and with their luminescent eyes see through the darkness of night to find their path. That's from John Lunwell's great book, Mythos and Cosmos. So a lion is just a perfect idea for a guardian of the stars, even a guardian of the underworld, as Yaldabaoth is often depicted. And as others have said, the lion in more Greek traditions was a symbol for the untempered passions, for the base passions, hunger, lust, and all that. And that, of course, would fit Yaldabaoth, because he just has to do what he wants to do. He will rape who he wants to rape. He will control. He will rebel against the aeons, and he's going to rule the universe with an iron fist. He will create floods. He will destroy entire races. He will be worshipped when he wants to worship. I mean, what a character, right? As for the serpent, there's really not much into that, or about that. A serpent, again, is sort of a lunar force, a temporal force, a force of wisdom. Of course, when you put the lion head on top, it means we have a suppressed wisdom or a darker wisdom. And that's what we get with Yaldabaoth, the Demiurge. So again, as I said before, how do you fight Galactus? How do you solve a problem like Maria Galactus? Well, again, information. Sophia's information, Aeon's information is only information that will be able to overcome such a supreme being, somebody you can defeat. And we definitely see some great depictions in modern times of Yaldabaoth. There's plenty in video games. Listeners are always sending me video games. He is called Yaldabaoth. We can, of course, think of the architect in The Matrix. We've got Christoph in The Truman Show. We've got the dad in the Lego movie, Dr. Ford in Westworld, and on and on and on. And again, these are supreme beings who are pretty much in control of anything and are somehow defeated by a person who has gained the right knowledge to defeat them and take them down. But at the end of the day, the truth is, if Yaldabaoth is the son of Sophia, then he happens to be our brother. He happens to be us. We are all sort of abortions in this world. We are sort of outcasts who never got a chance from our cosmic parents. We were cast down, maybe overprotected, but at the end of the day, not really guided very well. And we are just as tragic as Yaldabaoth. We are just as lost, and we don't see what we need to see. As some have said, Yaldabaoth is the ego. He's the best representation of the ego. And of course, Jung certainly alludes to it, sometimes very directly. Yaldabaoth is our ego. It can't see what's obviously there. Why do we always get into wars? Why do we fight with our loved ones? Why can't we see that there's something so much better out there? And sometimes it's so obvious. The answers are there, and then we forget. We go, I am a jealous God, and there is no God but me. We do that as humans. We imitate Yaldabaoth. We are his brother. We create limits. We overcreate laws. We lean too much on justice or Gevura from the Tree of Life in the Kabbalah. And we constrain ourselves in our little world of limits and time and arrogance. So Yaldabaoth is the ego, but he is us. So maybe we should have compassion. What did Neil Young say? Old man, take a look at my life. I'm a lot like you. So maybe the Demiurge needs a hug, or maybe we need a hug, or maybe we all just need more information. So that's really all I have on Yaldabaoth. I'm sure in time I'd like to maybe deal with the Archons and the Aeons and all good, but we might as well get that Gnosis, find out how to defeat the greatest of villains. So, Galactus. How are we going to defeat Galactus? We need our Silver Surfer, right? And that's Sophia. That is wisdom. That's what will save us in the end. So, for non-members, I will stop now. Nipples for men and Yog-Sothoth. And for those in the inner sanctum of Gnosis, I will take your Q&A, which I will then place in our member section and in the Patreon section. So, bless Stan Lee and bless you for being here.